Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming. I first met Pope Michael close to 5 years ago, I think. And in the time that I've known him, I've visited him a few times and corresponded a lot with him back and forth. And in that time, I found him to always be very intelligent, very kind, and especially with his mother, a very gracious and hospitable person. And I'm very grateful that he's taken his time and his energy to come up here to speak with us. Pope Michael lives in Delia, Kansas. He co-authored this book, Will the Catholic Church Survive the 20th Century? And he's also authored another book entitled Truth is One. And he's here today to talk about the memoir of Veronica Chatter, Waiting for the Apocalypse, and whatever else you would like to discuss. So I'll give you the floor. Pope Michael.
Thank you, Bill. Latin John peace is two, singing and shouting for every cue. Altars turned round, priest is two, commentators yelling, page 22. Communion rails going, stand up straight. Kneeling suddenly went out a day. Processions are forming in every aisle, salvation's organized single file. Rosaries out, psalms are in, hardly ever hear a word against sin. Listen to the lector, hear how he reads. Please stop rattling them rosary beads. Padre's looking puzzled, doesn't know his part. Used to know a whole deal in Latin by heart. I hope all the changes are just about done, but they don't drop bingo before I've won. Growing up during the changes, as it was called in the Catholic Church in the 1960s, was indeed an adventure. This poem I read in the late 1980s summarizes what was going on at that time. What you have just read about, I lived. Veronica gave you only part of the story, because she lost her faith about the same time I was entering the seminary. And the story continues on until this day. Veronica is just young enough that by the time she made her first communion, the Mass was probably already all in English, and the Novus Ordo was almost introduced. When I received my first communion, the canon was still in Latin. 8 years later, when my brother made his first communion, we had left the Novus Ordo, and he made his first communion in our living room in Oklahoma City. Location and age are very important to setting the scene for a story of anyone who lived through these tumultuous times. I'm about the same age as Veronica's older sister, Terry. In fact, who knows, we could be almost exactly the same age. So why is my life different from hers? We grew up in the same times. So I'm here, and for Veronica and most of her siblings went off into apostasy. And there's one major difference I noticed when I read this book, and it yelled at me. Veronica's folks were checked out of their children's lives and made some colossal mistakes. And even if we leave aside the move to Portugal, I believe the outcome would have been substantially the same. What happened with many, like Veronica's folks, and many traditions, they want to return to 50s Catholicism. I was afraid. I was afraid this picture wouldn't come out too good. I couldn't find a good one here. And this can be summarized as Mass on Sunday, fish on Friday, and $5 in the collection plate. However, it was without substance. Now, the traditionalists do add a daily rosary and wearing the scapular, as if this by itself will save our souls. And so let's compare our two families just a moment. Veronica's folks were checked out of their children's lives, that's obvious. My parents were part of my life and my brother's life. And I noticed also that the Arnold parents did not instruct their children in the facts of life as if ignorance would ensure chastity. If you think back to the Annunciation of the Blessed Virgin Mary, when the angel came down to announce that she was going to have Jesus, her first question was, how would this be accomplished, that she did not know man? She knew exactly how everything worked, and knew that she'd taken a vow of chastity and wondered how this would be accomplished. Parents have a solemn duty to educate their children. Now, ironically, Veronica and I have something in common. Both of our parents are converts. My dad being baptized on December 20th, 1968. Now, I have a benefit over most of my generation. In Oklahoma City, a group of concerned parents in about 1965 organized a catechism class. It was called just the Mother's Catechism class, but it was organized by a group of mothers who taught the various grades. And we had a firebrand amongst us who went to the local bishop and told the bishop, says, we're having a catechism class. We would like to rent the school at the cathedral parish, and we know you'll rent it to us, because if you don't, we're going to go rent from the Baptists, and we'll be on the front page of the Oklahoma City paper. And the bishop knew he'd do it. So that's what happened. So while most of this generation were not being taught the catechism, yeah, true, their parents were objecting to everything going on. And the changes in the church, they were not instructing their children in the faith at this point. We're talking about the late 60s. Now, there was a big problem. See, we live in the internet age. I mean, we got wonderful computers and stuff. I could go online and find anything I need to know to figure out the current condition of the church. In fact, I put this online. Truth is One. If you want to get it, you can go to my website and download it, Back in Exile. Back at this time, the copier was still a high-priced item to be found in offices only. I remember my dad working for AT&T. If they had a letter they wanted to circulate, he'd get to a teletype machine and cut a print tape, and then he could run copies. It was very difficult to circulate information. But in spite of all that, if someone found a useful piece of information, they were hard to find back then. They'd get it copied one way or another, and then once the Xerox made it into the grocery stores and stuff, and you get 10 cents a copy, things circulated throughout the country. Then people also, some people did print books like this one, This Apocalyptic Age. Unfortunately, we didn't get a hold of a copy of this back in the early 70s and realized that the Holy Sacrifice of Mass would be taken away completely. We knew there was a lot going on. That one we didn't get. Now this is an interesting book which we did get in that time frame. He claimed that the Pharmaceutical was actually released and published in newspapers in 1960. I don't know if that claim is true or not, but this particular book, One Story in Here, influenced our lives. They, seeing the problems going on in the early 60s, they moved out to the sticks. They had a big family. There's a big family picture in that book. And they even had one of their sons was a priest. He moved out with them. They get all moved out in this place, and they were the epicenter for an earthquake, which taught them, no, we need to come back into the world and try and warn people what's going on, which is why he wrote this, and I think he has written other books. And the third secret of Fatima, we do know about, it's a matter of papacy. It will become clear in 1960. I don't think it was published then, although it has a supposed version in there. Sister Lucy said it was contained in Apocalypse 8 to 13, which discusses Antichrist among many other things. It's my opinion, we'll never know its contents, but that's not why I came here tonight. This is another fascinating book. This circulated in about 1972. There was a lot of discussion, especially when Comet Cahotek. Has anyone heard of Comet Cahotek? Didn't think so. It was a big deal in the news in 1972-73. It was going to be a big deal, and then this book comes out. You notice the comet on the cover. It talks about a great comet is going to come and cause a catastrophe on the earth, and big changes are coming. I mean, we just watched what you heard about in the poem. The Novus Ordo had been instituted by this time. We were all concerned what's happening to the world and the church. And that's when Catholic prophecy came out. Well, Comet Cahotek turned out to be a big dud. That's why none of you have ever heard of it. In fact, I had a little home telescope, and we couldn't even spot it with a telescope. But I mean, it had big build-up. But that's, okay, that would be 1973. How old was Veronica? Would have been about 11 at that time. But this is the type of stuff that was circulating at that time. So we were wondering, as we realized the Mass was gone. Traditionalism was just in its infancy at this point. So can the chastisement, which Catholic prophecy talked about, you read about the Bulgarian here. I'd forgotten that term until I read this book, because I'd heard it way back. But everyone was expecting big catastrophe. Of course, we know it didn't happen back then. Although my mom did theorize after the Apocalyptic thing fizzled, that maybe the chastisement was the removal of the Mass at that time. But that's just only a theory. And then we get into traditionalism. Chatter, Veronica wasn't the only one to go to Mass in the home. And smaller, well, Oklahoma City's not a smaller town, but a smaller Catholic population. That's where we started out, was in homes. We had over 70 people in our home on several occasions for Mass back in the early 70s. In fact, the crowd got so large there were 2 families in Oklahoma City who could host the crowd. And then things started moving forward. In many places, instead of moving to garages and stuff like we read about here, I had never heard any of those stories, they moved to motels. And they theorized that the inns threw out Jesus at the time of his birth, and now they're taking him in. And then this was the birth of traditionalism. And traditionalism was advanced by Abbe George de Nante, the Liber Accusationis. He accused Pope Paul VI of heresy. I pulled this off their website where they have it posted. And that's an interesting story on April 10, 1973, because we heard about it. He'd written this accusation. Now, we never did see it at the time. No one had translated it into English. I believe he presented to Paul VI in Latin, because he had the theory that because he considered him for instituting the Novus Ordo and some of the things of Vatican II, a heretic, you had to serve him with paperwork. So he and a whole group from France went to Rome to serve this paperwork on Paul VI. Well, they were smart going in, and good thing. They had, like 100. If they had 100 people, they had 100 copies, and that's a big, thick thing. I haven't read it all myself yet. And each one had the mission to get it into Paul VI's hands. So they descend on the Vatican when he's going to be there for some minor event, where they figure they have a chance. The Vatican gets wind of it, and the first time in history, the Vatican calls the Italian police for help, although they did get a copy into his hands. And everyone thought, well, that's a great thing. Now maybe something will move forward. But no, it didn't. On August 29, 1976, Archbishop LeFebvre had just been suspended by Paul VI for the ordinations that June at Ypres, Switzerland. And he said, now quote, "They are our rights. The rite of the Mass is a bastard rite. The sacraments are bastard sacraments. We no longer know if they are sacraments which give grace or which do not give grace. We no longer know if this Mass gives the body and blood of our Lord Jesus Christ or if it does not give them." When this hit the news, and it just made the nightly news, and that's the quote they used on nightly news back in '76. You didn't use that word on television. In fact, that was the first controversy. Arguing, well, he said it in French, and he said illegitimate, which should be translated illegitimate. And there's the other half, like my dad, and I'm sure Veronica's dad was saying, they translated bastard, and I'm with him. We thought we'd found that vision. What did Veronica's dad say? But what finally got to Archbishop LeFebvre and made it impossible for him to support Vatican II was the Novus Ordo. That was an outright sacrilege. LeFebvre called it what it was, evil, and pandering to the Protestants. And he called those responsible for doing it wolves, thieves, and mercenaries. Nobody else had the guts to do that, not even the Roman Curia. Yes, we thought we'd found our bishop. In fact, I went to Cologne, Switzerland a year later and was in the seminary there for 4 months, and in their seminary in Armada, Michigan for a year after that. But we should go through for a moment, why did we reject the Novus Ordo? I don't know, that wasn't explained in here, and that's why I think Veronica's folks were checked out of their lives. I can remember when Mom and Dad made the decision to quit Novus Ordo. I get home from school that night, this is in 1972, so I wasn't that old. Mom takes me into the living room, Dad's at work because he worked 4 to midnight. Well, we had a big house, and we had a nice beautiful den where we watched TV and spent most of our time. The living room was for formal occasions. So she took me in the living room, I knew something was up. She sat me down, I don't know how long we spent, but she explained to me to make sure I understood, I knew why next Sunday we weren't going to be in that church. I wasn't as fast as I remember. She came home, because I was still in parochial school next door to that church. She dropped me off at the school. She looked up at that church and said, I ain't going back in. She comes home. Dad's just getting out of bed because he got off at midnight the night before. So he's drinking his first cup of coffee, and she says, well, we're not going back to that church. And Dad said, it's about damn time. But yes, we need to look into why. This was one of the big things that stuck out to us in the form of the consecration. There are many other things, and we don't have time to go into that, but this is one of the big ones. In the consecration of Mass, I don't know how many of you are familiar with the Catholic Mass, but it says, this is my blood which shall be shed for you and for many, in the Catholic Mass. In the Novus Ordo it says, for you and for all. Well, many doesn't equal all. And we can look in the Bible. And Vatican II says, for the liturgy is made up of unchangeable elements, divinely instituted, and of elements subject to change. I remember when I was doing studies about 20, 25 years ago, trying to sort out some more of these things, and I read that and I said, okay, they changed everything, including elements that are supposed to be divinely instituted. We can look in the Bible. This is from the New American Bible, approved by Paul VI, who I think is Antichrist. If you want to know more about that, you need to read this, because I don't want to waste your time going into all the details. This is approved and printed, this very version, on the Vatican.va website, and it says, many. You can look at any Bible. I've looked at quite a few. I've looked at all the ones I picked up. Any version, Protestant or Catholic, they say many. But at the Novus Ordo Missae, in most vernacular translations, not all, German, Italian, English, it says for all of the equivalent in language. I was doing an interview by Skype about a year and a half, 2 years ago, and they had a Polish priest to help with the translation so they could do the interview for Polish. And in case I brought up something complicated, she could stop and say, well, Father, what's he talking about? And at the close of the interview, he said, well, in Polish we say for many. That's the only vernacular I've heard of. And in the Latin original. Because I remember when we were trying to figure this out, priests were too. I met this priest from South Africa, a Father Philip Shamadine. And he had been a late vocation. In fact, he was a married man whose wife left him at the end of World War II, and he had to get special dispensation to enter the priesthood. And he finally received it, was ordained a priest. Well, he studied in Rome because he was a late vocation, so he knew people there. He knew a Cardinal Wright. He goes to Rome, he sees Cardinal Wright. He said, okay, I'm trying to figure this out. And he lays things out. He says, okay, when Paul VI says Mass in Latin, what does he say? And Cardinal Wright says, pro multis, which means for many. And when he says it in Italian, what does he say? He says per tutti, which means for all. And Father Shamadine looks up at Cardinal Wright and says, well, till he can figure it out, I'm going back to the Latin Mass, which I know is right. But that was one of the main things that brought us out. the doctrines which contradict faith were also becoming obvious, but that was a little harder to pin down. So that was one of the main ones. Now, what's ironic, I had this all prepared, and did you go into that Monday night?
Yeah.
Okay. You went to that Monday night. We had a priest from the town I used to live in, St. Mary's, Kansas, where I lived when I was elected pope, which happens to be the center for the Society of St. Pius X has a big center there. And he's been watching me since before I was elected. Well, he asked a lot of questions after Phil gave the presentation there, which is more generic. I themed this one to go with the book, because I thought, since you already be familiar. He says they're going to change it back to Clementi now, which makes me wonder what they're up to. They're not going to fix the doctrinal problems, but they're going to fix this one, which people, not just myself, many have complained about for 3 decades. Now, I ran across this one recently. Okay. The liturgical renewal effected in accord with the Constitution of Vatican Council II introduced certain changes also in the formulae pertaining to the very essence of the rites of the sacraments. Now, I just read to you from Vatican II Decree of the Liturgy where they said certain things can't be changed. Because in the sacraments of the Catholic Church, there are 2 types of rites. They're the essential rites, like the consecration of the Mass or the form of baptism. I baptize you in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Ghost. Then there are accidental rites. They're like putting the white cloth and handing the candle to someone at baptism, or reading the Gospel at Mass. But they're saying here, pertaining to the very essence of the rites, they changed the essential rites of the sacraments. So the sacraments in the Novus Ordo, they are saying, are essentially different from the Catholic rites. And this is the one thing I think all of us back in 1974 wish we had. I ran across this quite by accident, looking up something else just a couple years ago. Although I'd had the book before, no one had gone into and found this particular one was buried in the book. You have to either be looking for it or looking up something close to it like I was to find it. This is the one thing we didn't have in the 70s. If we had this in the 70s, I would think a lot of some traditionalists did eventually go back to the Novus Ordo, not knowing this. In fact, the Society of St. Pius X says the new rite of ordination is valid, although that wasn't their original position. And they should know about this. They should look at these things up. This one thinks that's a new religion out there, and they're saying we put in new sacraments to build our new religion. And I just heard about this the other day. A former seminarian was in Germany when Joseph Ratzinger was a cardinal, about 4 or 5 years ago. And he asked the following question: Father, could you explain what it is to be the basis of our faith? Ratzinger replied, don't mistake faith and love as separate things in the human existence. The Word became flesh, and behold, our salvation was a fact of the same life. Whether it's love or faith, the incarnation is the most profound reason why humans can accept the Word, the Church, and all which comes with it. Yes, also a pope, a priest, a layman. All have to be saved. All have already been saved. He's saying that everybody, this is their doctrine of their church. I call it universal salvation. They're saying everyone's going to heaven, period. No qualification. And it came out of his mouth about 4 or 5 years ago, although it's in a lot of other places. And that was one of the main doctrines of Vatican II. And we're going to be going back into that deeper this winter and going over it. Because this priest the other night says, well, they minimize that. So we're going to see what exactly the doctrines say. Father Karl Pulvermacher is an interesting priest. He left the Novus Ordo in the early to mid-70s. I'm not sure when. He joined with the Society of St. Pius X in May of 1976. We met him down in Houston, Texas. And he came through our home many times in Oklahoma City. I was reading an article by Father Chatter on the internet doing some research. And he reminded me of one of Father Karl's statements. When there are no more priests, they will restore the Latin Mass. What he meant by that, by the introduction of the new rite of ordination in 1968, which is invalid, so although they lay on hands, the words are wrong, the men do not become priests. By enough time enough men are not priests and bishops, although they think they are, they give us back the Latin Mass. Well, this priest the other night, he says the Latin Mass, he says the Latin Novus Ordo, and he says the English Novus Ordo. Whichever one you want. And I mean, you can go, I don't know, here in Iowa City, you might be able to find the Latin Mass. I'm not sure if Iowa City's big enough. I bet you go to Des Moines and find it. And then, after I read Father Chicago's article, I think, well, I remember that incident. A house on the west side of Oklahoma City, which we were using, which was owned by one of the families in our group. We're using it for Mass. We had set up permanent there. And it was after a morning Mass. The family that owned it, they had brought a couple of their aunts to the Latin Mass for the first time. Father Karl said from the pulpit in 1976, Paul VI is not Pope. And that was the first time someone said that many simple words, what's called sede vacantes, basically. That term was not invented until about 82, 83. I'm surprised Veronica knew it. She probably did some research to know the term. Because it was not in wide circulation in 76. Well, this stirred up this gal's aunts. And so afterwards, Father Karl was talking with them, explaining why he said what he said. He said, well, someday we'll have to elect our own pope. In fact, in 1976, there was much discussion about electing the pope. In fact, there was discussion about electing Archbishop LeFebvre as pope. Well, Archbishop LeFebvre turned out to not be the man we thought he is, but that's a story unto itself. But we did elect the pope in 1990. That's why I'm here. They may have the churches, but we have the faith. And this was the problem with Vatican II, which unleashed its spirit upon us. A new religion needs new forms of worship to fit its new doctrines. I just demonstrated they've changed the Mass. They've changed all the sacraments except the essential form of baptism is not changed. So if anyone's been baptized in Novus Ordo, unless there's reason to doubt the intention of the minister, or unless it's in the early 70s, there were some who got a little wild. Like one priest baptized a baby saying, I receive you into the community of the faithful, which is certainly invalid. I would not baptize you in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Ghost. Those type of abuses, I think, don't exist. But a new religion needs new, with new doctrines, needs new worship. And this was what happened in the Novus Ordo. Now the devil, who I believe is behind all of this, that's my opinion, he knew there would be a reaction. Okay? I don't know if any of you are Catholics, or whatever religion you're in. Your church was the same probably pretty much 10 years ago as it is today. 10 years from now it'll be probably the same. Okay? And the Novus Ordo has been the same before. Since about 74, 75 when they calmed down. But people like Veronica and I, our parents, I mean, we saw a radical change. You go in one Sunday, they do this, the next Sunday now we're doing that. The next Sunday we're doing something different. So we saw a radical change. Well, you do a radical change like that in anything. If they did a radical change in how they ran this university tomorrow, some of you might be going, whoa, that's not why I'm paying my money and why I came here. You'd be wanting to head to the door, you'd be protesting, and rightly so. And that's where traditionalism comes from. And in fact, that was Archbishop LeFebvre. And there are three basic branches of traditionalism. sedevacantist, which believes, well, that theory developed, but now it believes John the 23rd, Paul the 6th, John Paul 1 and 2, and Benedict the 16th are all heretical anti-popes. Now they're close to the truth. The only thing is, they say, we have no pope, and you ask them, well, don't you think we need to get a pope? In fact, I asked Father Chicano that about 2 weeks ago. Yeah. I didn't know they had any obligation to get a pope. I haven't yet had a chance to respond back to that one. You don't have a pope, you need to get one. But that's sedevacantist, and they'd rather set up their little chapels. Then there's the Society of St. Pius X, which was in its very early stages in this book. In fact, we were connected to the Society of St. Pius X in the same time frame. I never heard of either of these two priests, so I think they were probably just affiliated. I don't think they're ordained by LeFebvre. But they are not part of the mainstream society, which has now set itself up. And then there is what we call the Indult, which is in communion with Benedict XVI, and is celebrated in the same churches where they have the Novus Ordo usually. There are a few exceptions where they have a special Indult church, like near me in Maple Hill, Kansas. But they have one thing, and this is what I consider traditionalism did. They want the churches back. And that's what a lot of people went for. They've got their churches back, they got their Latin Mass, okay, they get their rosaries back. I mean, no one's talking against the rosary now that were in the late 60s, early 70s. I mean, you pull out a rosary, like, what are you doing that funny thing? They got it back. And I just ran across this, and I think if this had been printed, and it was available then, the Fatima Pledge, things might have been different. Now, I just thought I'd start off with point 2. To pray a part of the rosary while meditating on the mysteries. Now, a lot of people are like Veronica's mother. I mean, they got those beads going 24/7 when they're doing something else. But they're not meditating on the mysteries, not thinking about the various mysteries they're going by. So it's just superficial religion. And that's why people lose their faith. To wear the scapular of Mount Carmel as profession of this promise is an act of consecration to you. That's to the Blessed Virgin Mary. Now, the scapular of Mount Carmel is a wonderful devotion. But just throwing a scapular on is not going to get you into heaven. It's just a reminder of a way of life. Read point 1. To offer up every day the sacrifice demanded by my daily duty. And that's, I'm reading this book, I'm halfway through, and I said, they weren't doing it. And they were out, and I've seen that I could stand up here until the cows come home. They didn't throw us out of this room. And I could tell stories similar to this one that I've seen. That parents, they get involved. Oh, we got to fight the problems in the church, and we got to do this, we got to do this, and their poor children get totally neglected. And that's what happened here. And it's, I mean, there are places I want to cry. I'm reading the book because, I mean, yeah, you're not the only one like that. And I've seen people, and I'm not surprised Veronica lost her faith because her parents, I really don't think her parents have it now. They still have just points 2 and 3. They don't have point number 1. They want the externals of religion without the substance. And so, yeah, I got good time for some questions. I want to leave you plenty of time for questions. I know after reading this book, you probably have a lot of questions. Yes?
I was wondering about Father Polmacher. Isn't he the one who later was elected Pope Pius XIII?
No, that's Father Karl Polmacher's brother.
Okay.
Father Lucian.
Okay.
Yeah, Father Lucian was with the society in early 76. He left, then Father Karl Polmacher joined. I mean, like a week apart. And Father Lucian went off on his own and became an independent priest. And yes, he did get himself elected as Pope Pius XIII in 98. Yeah. Any other? Yeah.
Pope Michael, I know it'd be kind of a whole other presentation unto itself. Could you briefly explain to the class the situation that led up to your papal election, the rationale behind it, and how it happened?
Oh, okay. Yeah, it's basically, because I knew our time was short, I didn't go into that in great detail. All right. Where I left off, we were in the society. We moved to St. Mary's, Kansas with the society. Well, it's one thing to be going to some organization, every Sunday, or have them come into your home. They come in, like Thursday evening, they're gone Friday morning. You don't have no idea what's going on in that organization. Then you get right on top of them there at St. Mary's, Kansas. We moved to St. Mary's, Kansas just after it opened. We bought it in 78. They opened the school in 79. We moved January of 80. I was working there, and we started, my mom, my dad, and my brother's a little bit young. We all started seeing things. And then in January of 81, someone that had been working there got married away from there. They came back and they had a reception. And then the reception was still going, but they wanted to move it, so Dad said, well, party at Bawden's house. And we went up there, and 3 sets of parents were there, got talking, and they were all having the exact same problems in the school. And that's when we realized something's wrong with society, St. Pius X. So we came out of there. Well, I still thought God was calling me to the priesthood. So I began studying, and we got involved with some of the other traditionalists for a time. And I kept seeing one thing after another, and I got looking into it. Finally, the whole family pulled away from traditionalism at the end of 1983. Now, I was still trying to figure out, okay, which way should I go? I mean, these were confusing times. And I worked things out, and in 1987 I was presented with the doctrines of the Vatican Council that Peter have perpetual successors in the papacy to the end of time. And that's what the Sede of the Consuls just seemed to ignore. Second I read that, I can remember right where I was, probably at 10:30, 11 o'clock, I read this letter from someone. Well, I knew exactly what we had to do. We had to elect the Pope somehow, some way, and I went to work. And that's the book. Well, we actually wrote a series of articles, Teresa and I did in 1988, circulated them worldwide to generate interest. We kept running into problems, so we wrote a book, circulated this worldwide, called for an election. And it assembled July 16, 1990, in the little town of Bellevue, Kansas. And I was elected Pope that day, because very few would actually go through with it. Although a lot of people said, oh, that's a great idea, we're interested. But as the date was actually set, it reminded me of the gospel where they invite to the wedding feast, and they all made excuses. I bought a farm, they all had an excuse why we shouldn't do it here and now. They didn't have any good reason. And they didn't have any alternative plan, so we said, there's no reason not to. We went ahead. Because whoever assembles on the day of election votes, even if it's an extremely small number. Any more questions? Yes.
Well, so I understand that. So you weren't ever actually made a priest then.
No, I haven't been ordained yet.
So, sort of what the implications are of that is to your duties as the Pope.
Okay. Basically, what I have is the fullness of the authority of the papacy. I can issue an infallible decree. I can interpret church law, grant dispensations, and that type of thing. What we're seeking is a bishop or bishops to either convert them from traditionalism. There are bishops sent into Russia and China by Popes Pius XI, some of whom may still not even know everything you just heard about even happened. And there's evidence that they exist. We're trying to make contact with them and reunite with them. We think in God's good time, He'll restore the sacrifice of Mass. In prophecy, we saw that the Mass ceases entirely on earth for a time. But the Fathers of the Church also agree unanimously, and this is considered infallible by the Church, that there will be a universal conversion to the Catholic faith after the death of Antichrist. We believe Paul VI was Antichrist. And so there will be universal conversion, so it means a bishop will be found, and then things will start moving forward from there. Yes?
Isn't the Antichrist Jewish?
Not necessarily. That's one of the things, like that Catholic prophecy book, and there are a couple other books came out on prophecy. There's a lot of private prophecy. I mean, there's one that he's born of like a Jewish whore or something. But these are private prophecies, and there's not much weight to be given to them. There is evidence that Paul VI may have been of Jewish ancestry. Okay. But I mean, he doesn't have to be Jewish. We have to separate those things that we're certain of from sacred scripture, or what the fathers are unanimous on, and then the other private revelations and private interpretations of the fathers, which are in great disagreement. Yes?
You mentioned what you can do as Pope without receiving holy orders yet, but you didn't mention what you can't do. So what can't you do without receiving holy orders?
The main thing I can't do is administer some of the sacraments. Holy orders, confession, confirmation, extreme unction, or say the holy sacrifice of the Mass. I can witness marriages, because that doesn't require holy orders, and of course anyone can baptize.
What exactly does the process of electing a pope entail? Like, who votes for the pope? Like, does the entire congregation do it, or just a select group of people?
Okay. Ordinarily, the law is set up for a select group of people to elect the pope. In the early ages of the church, there was the clergy and people of Rome, because he is also bishop of Rome. And then in later ages, it was restricted to the cardinals. But with Vatican II, all the cardinals left the church, and we don't believe any appointed after 58 were even valid. So by 1990, we were left with only one cardinal from 1958 even alive, and he was a notorious modernist heretic, Cardinal Leger, so he was out of question. The canonists of the church have all figured out, okay, what would the church do if all the cardinals died? And they come up with this theory, but when you get down to the bottom line, the universal church somehow, some way can elect a pope. Because the church, like any society, let's say a bomb dropped on Washington, D.C., killed off the president, vice president, and everybody in the line of succession to the presidency. Someone would still run this country. There'd be some way we could reconstitute the country. And we're in a similar emergency situation. Yeah?
You mentioned St. Athanasius.
Yeah.
Can you give a little more background about his time and what happened in his time in terms of why did you pope him, in particular?
Well, basically, he was at the time of the Arian heresy, which was affecting the church almost as bad as the Vatican II heresy has. He was, I forget what diocese he was bishop of, but he spent more time, I think, in exile from his diocese than he was ruling his diocese. And so he was writing a letter back to his flock saying, yes, the Arians have our churches. And he said, what's more important, church buildings or the faith? He said, well, obviously the faith. He said, they've got the churches. We can't do anything about that now. But we have the faith, and we'll stand firm on that. Yes?
I've been curious for a number of years about the American Catholic relationship with the Bible. I mean, given the fact that we we live in a largely Protestant culture that has quite a significant emphasis on Bible as a source of American tradition. And so I'm just wondering if you might have a comment on what you think the appropriate role of the Bible is in Catholic life today. Is it something that should be, does the laity need some help in terms of understanding it, or is it something that should be left to the individual reader?
Well, that's one of those things, even the Bible says, there are things in here that are difficult to understand. So what you need is not just a Bible with Bible verses in it, but you need a Bible which also has commentary in it. There is one in reprint by Haydock. It's kind of expensive, better than $100. You can go online and get that one. It has verses up here, Catholic commentary down at the bottom. And that's very useful. And I do believe reading and understanding the Bible is essential I spend a lot of time reading the Bible myself.
So it's not just for the clergy or for the, it's for all the people. You think it's appropriate for all the people?
Oh, definitely, yes. Yes.
Not to ask too sensationalistic a question. I just know from previous conversations with you that during a point in time, I believe in the 80s, you were in conversation with Hutton Gibson, Mel Gibson's father. Would you care to just talk a little bit about what he was like and what his environment was?
Okay. Hutton Gibson was a firebrand, staunch Sede Vacantus. He wrote a book, Is the Pope Catholic?, which I picked up, used a few years ago. And that was his position. He's also a strong traditionalist. And I don't know who he has for a priest now, but he's got a priest somewhere. But when I knew him, all we were talking about were matters of Vatican II and stuff. I didn't know about the more sensationalistic things, like his anti-Holocaust stand, I think it was, yeah. But it doesn't surprise me. There is a strong strain of that amongst some traditionalists, and I've seen it over the years. Well, we saw it with the Society's Bishop Williamson in his improved interview, which I saw on the internet, and I watched the whole thing, I downloaded the transcript, and I read it. He's going by his own admission from one source. He's saying if they change their mind, he'll change his. I said, Richard, because I knew it. He was in his own, I was. Why did you even open your big mouth? You haven't, by your own admission, you haven't done enough research to say the Holocaust happened or didn't happen. I mean, you should have kept your mouth shut. And even if he had proof that the Holocaust didn't happen, as some others observed, is this what he should even be talking about? That distracts from any important point. If I got up here and I said the Holocaust didn't happen, not that I'm saying it, if I said that, you'd ignore everything else I said. And because that's not even an issue we should be discussing. But these people have gotten off on side issues, and I've seen more and more of that all over amongst traditionalism. They get off on these side issues, make fantastic statements, uncalled for statements, publicly, and that's the statement that makes the news that anyone will ever hear about. Whereas the real important things we'd like to say would get totally ignored. I mean, Bishop Williamson will probably never be successful at saying anything good, although I disagree, of course, with many of his points. Although it wouldn't surprise me that one day he will take about half the society with him when the society reconciles with Benedict XVI. I think he'll take the other half and go say to the Congress. That might be interesting. I wonder if Hutton would go with him. I kind of doubt it, because Hutton's been down the society. Yes?
So do the Senate Apocalyptics not recognize you as the Pope? Do they still believe that there is no
They believe there is no Pope, and they have just gotten stuck in that position.
Would they be able to have their own election and try to find a new Pope, or how would that?
Well, they cannot elect a Pope for two reasons. First, there is a Pope. Okay? And that's the obvious one. The second one is, part of traditionalism is heretical in and of itself, rejecting certain essential doctrines of the Catholic faith. And so they are outside the Catholic Church. So if they attempted to elect a Pope, they would have someone similar to the Archbishop of Canterbury, or what I think of Benedict XVI. He would be just an anti-Pope. Do you have a question?
Me?
Yeah, I thought you...
Oh, no, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I was trying to piece together what you thought about apostolic succession and what the commission's validity of it was. It seemed that you didn't think that there was apostolic succession that you could get from many sources, that maybe the underground bishops in China would be good or something. Do you have any idea, what's your theory about who would be available for that? Who's still in and able to confer orders?
Okay. Well, see, apostolic succession is somewhat complicated. It's been made awful simple, especially by the traditionalists, the Orthodox, and the Old Catholics. If the laying on of hands occurred with the proper words, that man is a valid priest or bishop. And for traditionalists, Orthodox, Old Catholics, that's all they require. Apostolicity consists of three things. Holy orders, which is the least important. Authority and jurisdiction to teach in the church, which comes with the papacy and with appointment as diocesan bishop. And the mission to teach. I possess two of those. I don't possess holy orders. Now, the thing about a valid bishop, he can be reconciled with the church. The Pope has full authority to reconcile him with the church. And then he can be given authority and mission. And he could ordain and consecrate me. But at the moment, he possesses the power of holy orders, but not the permission to use it except in extreme emergencies such as danger of death.
Thanks.
Oh, good. That was a good question. I think, yes, we have one there.
I'm just a little curious as like, I don't know, some theology. So if I'm not a part of the Catholic Church, can I still go to heaven?
Basically, Christ found a church to go to heaven for. Now, this is what we spent all 45 minutes on Monday night. I'll try to make it simple. Hopefully we won't get diverted. God will not hold you guilty of the sin of infidelity if you're in total ignorance and you're not rejecting Him outright. Okay? It is a complicated matter, but we're not saying that all those who are not in the Catholic Church are for sure going to hell.
No. Could you repeat that?
We're not saying that all who are outside the Catholic Church are for sure going to hell. You have to follow the natural law, which is written on your heart, which is basically outlining the Ten Commandments. In other words, you can't steal, you can't murder, you can't lie.
So, but if I do that, what if I murder someone? I can't go to heaven at all.
Well, you could repent of that even.
Okay.
We can't go too far into this, because even Pope Pius IX was questioned about this. He said they should follow the natural law, and they won't be held guilty if they're in ignorance of the truth. In other words, not willfully rejecting the Catholic faith. So beyond that, we shouldn't investigate. God will figure it out. God's not going to create you and doom you to hell because you don't know about the faith.
But I guess my question is, how do you respond to verses that are as simple as repent, for by grace are you saved, and Ephesians 2:8 and 9? How do you respond to that then?
Well, God does expect us to repent of our sins, and yes, He sends us grace, and we have to correspond with it. And God does send grace to everybody. And everybody has sufficient grace to save their souls.